39-year-old Connie Margada. Debates lived a vibrant life in Ellington, Connecticut, alongside her husband, 40-year-old Richard Debates, and their two young sons, 9-year-old Richard Jr., affectionately known as RJ, and 6-year-old Connor. Hailing from Rockville, Connie came from a large, boisterous family. As she matured, she found immense joy in hosting parties and gatherings, a passion that defined her character. For Connie, nothing brought her greater happiness than bringing friends and family together. Whether it was delicious food, spirited games, or festive celebrations, she thrived in the warmth of camaraderie. Christmas, New Year's, Halloween. Every season was an opportunity for her to plan something special. While many people drift apart after school and college, Connie was determined to keep those connections alive. She took it upon herself to organize high school reunions, ensuring that friendships endured over time. Her infectious energy and unwavering cheerfulness made Connie a beloved figure among her friends. They often remarked on her readiness to offer advice, always there in a heartbeat, regardless of her own busy schedule. It was at one of these summer gatherings that she first met Richard Debates. Richard, a computer technician, may not have seemed the perfect match for Connie at first glance. Yet, as they grew closer, it became clear they were well suited for each other, their personalities complementing one another beautifully. As time passed, Richard's playful side became more apparent. He was known as the class clown, always striving to bring laughter to those around him. Connie matched his spirit, and it was clear they shared a deep connection. Richard introduced Connie to his parents. His mother recognized instantly that Connie was someone special. On July 4, 2003, the couple celebrated their love in front of family and friends, beginning their journey together in a beautiful suburban home. Settling into life at 7 Birchview Drive with RJ and Connor, Connie's legendary parties expanded in scope and creativity. She sought out the most extravagant props and decorations to elevate every celebration. Connie delighted in creating magical moments for her children, always searching for the most whimsical costumes. At one unforgettable Easter party, she told the children that if they threw jelly beans into the garden and went to sleep, they would wake up transformed into lollipops. As the kids slumbered, Connie ventured into the night, collecting the jelly beans and scattering lollipops for the children to discover come morning. She embodied the spirit of someone who went above and beyond for those she loved. Connie poured her heart into everything she did, always striving to bring joy to others. By December 23, 2015, just 2 days before Christmas, her home was a vision of holiday spirit, beautifully adorned and alive with anticipation. With presents wrapped in the excitement of the season filling the air, Connie prepared her boys for school, blissfully unaware of the unimaginable tragedy that awaited them. On that fateful day, Richard dropped off the boys before heading home to change into his work clothes. Meanwhile, Connie was preparing for her spin class. Just before 11 a.m., the tranquility of Birchview Drive was shattered. Neighbors were drawn to their windows, alerted by the sound of sirens and the rush of vehicles, as authorities descended upon the Debates' home. An alarm had been triggered, leading to a brief yet urgent 911 call. 911, hello? The operator answered, unaware of the chaos that lay ahead. Word spread quickly that a home invasion had occurred at 7 Birchview Drive. Connie and Richard had been brutally attacked by a masked intruder who had since fled the scene. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, checking homes to ensure the intruder wasn't hiding nearby. Residents were instructed to gather everyone in their homes, to stay in a single room, and remain silent until given the all-clear. Anxiety hung thick in the air as families waited, fearful of what had transpired. However, the reality of the situation was about to become even more harrowing. Richard was discovered tied to a chair, bleeding and lying on the floor with the chair precariously on top of him. He was rushed by ambulance, his condition deemed unstable. Tragically, Connie was found in their basement, her life cruelly taken. She had been shot once in the back of the head and once in her stomach, leaving detectives to conclude that the intruder had long since fled. As residents were finally allowed to step outside, they were met with a shocking sight. A sea of yellow crime scene tape, flashing lights, and uniformed officers. The surreal scene left the community reeling, struggling to comprehend the horror that had unfolded just moments before. As residents emerged from their homes, they were met with a surreal scene, a landscape dominated by yellow tape, flashing lights, and officers in uniform. The atmosphere was nothing short of unbelievable. The unfolding events felt like a plot plucked from a grim television drama. After Richard received treatment at the hospital, detectives arrived to interview him. Though visibly shaken and in shock, he recounted the harrowing events of that fateful morning. He left home at 8:09 a.m., intent on dropping the children off at school. He returned shortly after to change into his work shirt, catching a glimpse of Connie as she changed into her gym clothes. Connie was backing her car out of the driveway, headed for a spin class at the local YMCA. However, the class had been canceled, forcing her to return home. Richard faced a 40-minute commute to work. 10 minutes into his drive, he realized he had forgotten his laptop. Reluctantly, he turned back. As he did, a notification pinged on his phone. His alarm system had been triggered by something or someone inside the house. Concerned for their safety, he quickly emailed his boss, explaining he would be late. He arrived home between 8:45 and 9:00 a.m., his instincts on high alert. Upon entering, he heard a noise upstairs. Cautiously, he ascended, only to confront a tall man dressed in camouflage, his face obscured by a mask, rifling through Connie's jewelry. When the intruder noticed him, he brandished a knife. The intruder demanded money, credit cards, and PIN numbers. Richard complied, handing over his wallet. Though the assailant's face was concealed, Richard gauged him to be around 6 feet 2 inches tall, built stockily, with a deep voice that resonated menacingly. In a moment of grim comparison, Richard likened him to Vin Diesel. But as the encounter escalated, chaos ensued, and everything became a blur. He heard Connie returning and urgently shouted for her to flee. He called out for her to escape, but instead of running away, Connie dashed toward the basement. Richard believed she was seeking a weapon, as they had 15 guns in the house, one secured in a locked box below. Connie fled downstairs, but rather than finding safety, she ran toward the danger. Richard's heart raced as the intruder pursued her, and then the sound of gunfire shattered the air. At 9:05 a.m., Richard descended into the basement, only to find his wife lifeless on the floor, the intruder now wielding one of his guns. In a brutal twist, the assailant stabbed him in the legs with a box cutter. Desperately, the intruder zip-tied Richard to a chair and tormented him with a blowtorch. "I was sitting in the chair, half tied up and in shock," Richard recounted. "What do you mean half tied up?" "I had one leg free and one arm free. I had one leg tied and one arm tied. The zip tie was fairly tight around my neck. When the blowtorch caught a bit of his mask on fire, he dropped it. I started to scream for help. I shouted for help but couldn't hear a soul. I got really dizzy." In an act of sheer survival, Richard managed to grab the blowtorch, turning it against his attacker. The assailant, now disfigured, fled the scene in haste. Still bound to the chair, Richard mustered every ounce of strength to drag himself upstairs, reaching the kitchen to activate the panic button linked to their alarm system. With trembling hands, he made a frantic 911 call. The tale he spun was so wild and terrifying that detectives felt lost, unsure of where to begin their investigation. They turned their attention to the neighbors. Friends of Connie and Richard revealed to detectives that the couple had encountered significant issues with a contractor in the months leading up to the incident. Dissatisfaction with his work had escalated to the point where they had sued him for several $1,000s. Amid the turmoil, one of their cars bore the scars of violence, its windshield shattered. Connie, consumed by fear, believed it was Richard's doing. Despite her aversion to firearms, the threat loomed large, prompting her to consider purchasing a gun for their safety. In a decision that would haunt them, Richard bought one, storing it in the basement. Forensic testing later confirmed that the gun Richard had purchased was the very weapon that took Connie's life. Investigators traced this back to a contractor named Ken, who acknowledged that their professional relationship had soured. Ken expressed frustration over the financial loss stemming from a civil suit, but insisted he had moved on from the incident. While the timing was certainly curious, police instincts leaned toward skepticism. Ken willingly posed for photographs and allowed officers to inspect his devices, eager to demonstrate his innocence. Richard Debates, a man with no prior criminal record, found himself in a precarious position. His physical description, his height, build, and voice, did not align with the details he had provided about the suspect. For someone who had frequented their home as often as he did, it was surprising that he did not recognize the man, even while masked. Ken, the contractor involved in ongoing legal disputes, had a solid alibi and was cleared of suspicion shortly after Christmas, a time when many were preparing to celebrate the new year. As the community of Ellington mourned the loss of Connie Debates, her family and friends prepared for her wake. Despite the biting cold, the turnout was immense, a testament to the impact Connie had on those around her. Hundreds of mourners waited in a line that stretched for 3 hours to pay their respects to Richard at the funeral. Among them were Connie's two best friends, who had shared 2 decades of memories with her, often in the couple's home. Hundreds of townsfolk queued for hours to pay their respects at Connie's funeral, waiting in line for 3 long hours to speak with Richard. Among the mourners were Connie's closest friends, women who had shared 2 decades of friendship and had spent years in the couple's life. To the astonishment of Connie's friends, Richard departed the funeral unusually early, leaving them to ponder if there had been any breakthroughs in the investigation by that point. 2 long weeks had passed since the tragic murder of 39-year-old Connie Debates, whose lifeless body had been discovered just before Christmas. Police had responded to an alarm at her home on Birchview Drive, where they found Richard injured inside the smoke-filled residence. Upon further investigation, officers uncovered the shocking reality. Connie had suffered gunshot wounds to both her head and stomach. Her death was ruled a homicide, yet the authorities had yet to make an arrest. While they reassured the public that there was no ongoing threat, the shadow of fear loomed over the residents of Ellington. In the wake of this tragedy, Fox 61 reporter Katie Corrado ventured into Ellington, seeking answers amidst the growing tension. Katie reported that the murder, which took place on December 23rd, had left the townsfolk restless. The passage of time without resolution only served to fuel rampant speculation and gossip. At Luann Lindsay's nail salon on West Road, longtime patrons engaged in fervent discussions about Connie's murder. Weeks had slipped away since the crime, yet no arrests had been made. Every day, customers inquired, "Have you heard anything new?" "This is what we heard." Luann, who had known Connie since childhood, expressed her hope that justice would be served. "I grew up with her in Vernon, and she was always a wonderful person," Luann shared, her voice tinged with sorrow. "I hope they find the right person who did this to her." Other neighbors, hesitant to speak on camera, echoed the sentiment that the lack of an arrest was both frightening and unsettling. The community was consumed with questions, yearning for clarity amidst the chaos. As whispers circulated, the detectives assigned to the case worked tirelessly, waiting for crucial evidence to arrive. They needed to ensure every detail was in place before taking decisive action. Ellington's first selectman, Lori Spielman, remained in regular contact with the police. She was informed that this was not a random act, but rather an isolated incident. When pressed for a timeline regarding potential developments, she could only respond, "I don't know. Maybe next week, but they are still waiting." The authorities awaited laboratory results that could hold the key to unraveling the case. Attempts to reach Richard Debates for an update were met with silence, adding another layer of mystery to the unfolding tragedy. In the days that followed, Richard appeared to maintain an unusual demeanor. Reports indicated he was seen enjoying dinner, drinks, and hosting gatherings at his home, an unsettling contrast to the sorrow enveloping his family and friends. One friend reported staying in close contact with law enforcement, receiving updates that the case was classified as isolated. When asked about the timeline for any developments, she could only speculate, perhaps next week. But the wait continued. Investigators awaited lab results to shed light on the evidence collected. Attempts to reach out to state police for an update on the investigation were met with silence, as were the efforts to contact Richard. In the days that followed, Richard appeared remarkably upbeat. He was seen dining out, enjoying drinks, and hosting gatherings at his home, an odd contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded. Richard Debates maintained an unsettling facade, joking as if the world had not crumbled around him. To an outsider, it was as if the brutal murder of his wife had never occurred, and the vicious attack against him was but a mere anecdote. Meanwhile, he took to Facebook. In a public display of resolve, he declared his commitment to staying strong for his boys, expressing gratitude for the outpouring of support from the community. Grief, a perplexing journey, had no guidebook, yet whispers began to circulate about Richard's demeanor. There lingered an unsettling vibe around him. Something felt amiss. Family, friends, and investigators alike began to harbor doubts about his narrative, sensing that the truth was cloaked in shadows. On Birchfield Drive, the investigation trudged forward at a glacial pace. Neighbors remained silent, their houses too far apart for any sounds of that fateful night to have traveled. Detectives soon acknowledged the grim reality of the scene. There was no sign of forced entry, though a basement window stood ajar, possibly the intruder's entry point. Nothing appeared to be missing, and the home remained undisturbed. Canine units failed to pick up any sense of an intruder. Strangely, the first dog on the scene seemed more interested in Richard than the investigation. 2 additional dogs searched for the scent of an intruder but found none leaving the premises. Meanwhile, the wallet that Richard claimed had been stolen was discovered just outside his home. Surprisingly, the wallet contained all its contents intact. The gun recovered from the scene bore no fingerprints, neither from the alleged intruder nor from Connie or Richard. Though Richard had sustained some knife wounds, medical staff deemed them superficial. As Richard spoke with detectives, his narrative began to unravel. What once were absolute certainties about the events turned into vague uncertainties. Initially, he claimed to have heard Connie get shot, then insisted he witnessed the act. Ultimately, he fell silent, stating he neither saw nor heard anything at all. Richard Debates initially told first responders that a killer was still lurking inside the house. However, under questioning from detectives later, he contradicted himself, claiming he had witnessed the assailant leave. He stated that the horrific events unfolded just before 9 a.m., with Connie being shot merely 5 minutes later. Strangely, the 911 call did not come until nearly 10:30 a.m. In another version of his account, Richard insisted that he had seen Connie leave the house. He reiterated that everything had begun just before 9:00 a.m., and Connie was shot shortly thereafter. Yet, the delay in calling 911 raised eyebrows, as it wasn't made until almost 10:30. On Christmas Eve, just a day after Connie's tragic death, Richard retained a defense attorney. The following week, he took a significant step that hinted at ulterior motives. He filed a claim for Connie's life insurance policy, valued at $475,000. Adding to the unsettling circumstances, Richard withdrew $93,000 from an investment account in Connie's name. It became increasingly clear that beneath the surface of what appeared to be a perfect marriage, a far more tumultuous reality was unfolding behind closed doors. In December 2014, Connie had begun drafting a note on her iPhone, ominously titled, "Why I Want a Divorce." Within those digital pages, she expressed her deep frustrations regarding Richard's reckless handling of finances. Her grievances extended beyond money. She articulated feelings of neglect, describing Richard as an unfit parent who offered her neither attention nor affection. Connie lamented, "He takes money from accounts that don't belong to him, says he's sorry, but takes no responsibility for it." In her candid reflections, she revealed, "I don't know anything about his day, who he speaks to, or what goes on in his life other than work. I'm tired of covering for him. I'm tired of lying and acting like things are great when they aren't." In a section she labeled, "Reasons to Stay in My Marriage," Connie wrote, "When he is in a great mood, he is fun to be around. I still find him attractive. I'm myself around him. But what could possibly drive Richard to commit such a heinous act?" Authorities had remained tight-lipped, yet they had identified a motive early on, just moments after their first interview with Richard. While in the hospital, Richard's affair with a woman named Sarah came to light. Sarah, a high school acquaintance, was known to Connie. She had even participated in their wedding as a reader. Richard and Sarah's on-again, off-again relationship had intensified in May 2015. By June, Sarah discovered she was pregnant and allegedly urged Richard to leave Connie for her. During a grueling 7-hour interview in the hospital, Richard voluntarily mentioned Sarah. He admitted to their sexual relationship, framing it around Sarah's desire for children of her own. In a surprising turn, Richard's mistress approached the couple for assistance. She expressed her desire to have a child on her own, but faced financial barriers. With vulnerability, she inquired if Richard could be her sperm donor. Richard recounted that, due to the high costs associated with medical procedures, they had opted for a more unconventional approach, which he described as the conventional way. A perplexing twist to how the baby was conceived. When detectives pressed him, asking if Connie was aware of his attempts to get Sarah pregnant, Richard replied affirmatively, stating, "Yes, Connie not only co-signed everything." In a chilling revelation, Richard claimed it was Connie's idea. The detectives found it hard to believe. This assertion would become even more troubling as further evidence surfaced. Richard confided in friends about the affair, admitting he had accidentally gotten Sarah pregnant. His narrative shifted when he claimed that Connie could not have another child. Despite Connie's desire for a child, Sarah offered to bear the baby for them, suggesting a co-parenting arrangement. The investigators raised eyebrows, leading Richard to alter his story once again. He acknowledged the pregnancy was indeed an accident, a result of a month-long affair that caught him off guard. Richard began lying to Connie, telling her he was working late with friends. Yet, with Sarah, he professed his love and declared his intention to file for divorce. By the time tragedy struck, Sarah was just 8 weeks away from delivering their daughter. In a twisted attempt to maintain appearances, Richard whisked Connie away on a romantic trip to Vermont. However, when Connie shared photos of their getaway on Facebook, Sarah realized the deception. The question lingered. Did Connie ever uncover the affair or the impending arrival of her husband's child? Friends insisted she remained blissfully unaware, stating she would have confided in someone. Whatever the truth may have been, it appeared Richard had made a chilling decision: to eliminate Connie from his life and pursue a new beginning. In June 2015, he took steps toward that goal. He consulted a divorce attorney, but never filed any official paperwork. Richard's phone records indicated a text sent to Sarah just 2 days before Connie's murder, promising to leave his wife. The following day, he sent Sarah a message filled with affection, declaring his love and stating he would see her the next day. Meanwhile, Connie's phone revealed a heated argument with Richard, in which she accused him of dishonesty regarding a bill. "You lied to me, and I am again cleaning up your mess. Great day off and Merry Christmas," she exclaimed. Unbeknownst to Connie, Richard had been using a secret credit card to fund his double life, purchasing flowers for Sarah, booking hotels, and spending over $1,000 at a strip club. Unbeknownst to many, Richard had conducted internet searches for deadly over-the-counter combinations, fast, untraceable homemade poison, and tasteless toxins that were readily available. As if this wasn't alarming enough, a crucial piece of evidence remained undiscovered, waiting to be fully compiled. Time passed, and soon it was Christmas 2016, followed by the New Year, and into the spring of 2017. Connie, a vibrant and active individual, was known for her dedication to fitness, wearing her Fitbit daily. On the day of her death, the data recorded by the device told an entirely different story than the one Richard had provided. Investigators were already aware that Richard had waited over an hour before dialing 911. Initially, they attributed this delay to trauma and stress, believing it might have muddled his sense of time. However, a forensic examination of the evidence, including Connie's Fitbit, CCTV footage, and data from the computer and house alarm, revealed a clearer timeline of that fateful morning. At precisely 8:00 and 8:26 a.m., Richard was active on Facebook from his home computer, an alibi that coincided with the time of the crime. Richard Debates claimed he was driving to work, when a log from his computer revealed activity on Outlook.com between 8:45 and 9 a.m. He insisted he returned home to find an intruder. This series of events unfolded shortly before Connie returned home and was shot. At 8 a.m., Connie left for her spin class. Just 1 minute later, Richard logged into the home alarm system, attempting to disarm it at 8:50. He succeeded and rearmed the system 9 minutes later. Once again, he disarmed it using his keychain fob. At 8 a.m., Connie arrived at the gym. A few minutes later, she sent a Facebook message to her therapist. At 9:04 a.m., Richard sent an email to his supervisor, claiming he was pulled over in his car. However, the email was clearly sent from his home IP address at 9:08 a.m. 10 minutes later, Connie left the building and returned to her car. Richard was browsing the Indian Valley YMCA website. This was the very location where Connie had gone for her 9 a.m. class. Connie's Fitbit recorded activity when the garage door opened at 9:40 a.m. At 9 a.m., she was active on Facebook. It appeared Richard was trying to figure out how to lure her into the basement during this time. At 10:05 a.m., Connie's last movements were logged on her Fitbit, and at 10:12 a.m., the panic alarm for the home security system was triggered from Richard's keychain fob. The data indicated Connie was alive and well for approximately an hour after Richard claimed she had died, and nothing corroborated his account. Richard had not left the house. The timings failed to align, and Connie's movements and heart rate never suggested she was fleeing from an intruder. Finally, in April 2017, Richard was arrested and charged with murdering his wife more than a year earlier. Connie Debat, an Ellington mother of two, suffered a brutal death in her home just 2 days before Christmas. At last, a breakthrough in the case had emerged. A newly released 50-page arrest warrant detailed the events that transpired within that home and the turmoil inside that marriage. Additionally, exclusive video captured Richard being transported by state police. On that fateful night, Richard was charged not only with murder, but also with tampering with evidence and providing false statements to the police. Grant stated that Debat was being held on a $1 million bond. He was scheduled to appear in court on Monday. State police emphasized the thoroughness of their investigation, leaving no stone unturned. Every lead, every piece of evidence, and every witness was meticulously examined. This case was about the victim, and Grant noted that the extensive investigation involved collaboration from multiple law enforcement agencies. The diligence was paramount to prevent any future mistrials. During this lengthy process, the goal was to ensure a solid case against Richard. Community members reacted to the arrest of Richard Debat in their close-knit neighborhood. The loss of life is profoundly tragic, especially when it involves someone so beloved. On Friday afternoon, as Richard pulled onto the family street, he was served with an arrest warrant, charged with the murder of his wife, Connie. Community members now felt that justice was within reach. They believed the authorities wouldn't present an update unless they had substantial evidence. It was the husband, evidence that took nearly a year and a half to compile. Residents viewed the prolonged investigation as a positive development. Now, the police had meticulously crossed every T and dotted every I before proceeding with charges against him. The fear was that without this thoroughness, a skilled defense attorney could dismantle the entire case or secure Richard's release. Unfortunately, a murderer could potentially roam free, if indeed it was him. Yet the silver lining was the comprehensive investigation that had taken place. This gave the community hope that, in the end, justice would prevail. Still, the town remained shaken by the crime. It was a stark reminder of the dangers that lurked in the world. A world where one must always be vigilant. Despite the unfolding tragedy, the community held on to hope that justice would prevail. Yet the residents were left shaken, grappling with the reality that their world had turned dangerous. In a place once considered safe, vigilance became a necessity. In a statement released by Richard's attorney, he asserted his client's innocence, expressing confidence that Richard would be vindicated once the trial concluded. Richard had secured his release on a $1 million bail, allowing him to await trial outside of custody. During this period, Richard attempted to co-parent the child he had with his mistress, Sarah. However, More tragedy struck in 2019 when Connie's father passed away. Despite his long battle with illness, he had clung to life, hoping to see justice served for his daughter. Connie's brother revealed that their father's body had simply given out, leaving him to die without witnessing the arrest of his daughter's killer. Richard's trial had been initially scheduled for April 2020, but as jury selection commenced, the world was gripped by the pandemic. Compounding the delays, Richard's attorney passed away, forcing yet another postponement of proceedings. Finally, in April 2022, after 6 agonizing years since Connie's murder, the long-awaited trial commenced. The case had attracted worldwide attention, although cameras were barred from the courtroom, leaving the public to rely on limited media coverage for updates. Inside the courtroom, the former detective testified that Richard Debates had willingly consented to a search of his home in Ellington. He also allowed law enforcement to collect DNA samples and test for gunshot residue. The prosecution presented a trove of evidence that included photographs of Richard's injuries taken while he lay in his hospital bed, as well as blood-stained clothing, hospital socks, and a shoe. Outside the courtroom, Richard's attorney emphasized the importance of respecting the trial process, hinting at the significance of a Fitbit that had yet to be mentioned in court. The jury was set to hear a 4-hour recording that could prove pivotal to the case. Meanwhile, the evidence continued to pile up. Over 600 pieces were submitted, with testimony from more than 130 witnesses, including Richard himself. Richard's defense team argued that law enforcement had fixated on him from the outset, building a timeline that fit their narrative. However, this assertion was met with skepticism, as many knew the police had diligently pursued every lead Richard had provided, including inquiries into the contractor he had mentioned. The investigation revealed inconsistencies in Richard's various accounts of the events that transpired, alongside technological evidence and forensic analysis from the crime scene. The police had ruled out all other potential suspects, leaving Richard as the only person of interest. While Richard's lawyers pointed to unidentified DNA found in the home, including on the firearm that had taken Connie's life, they claimed that a house cleaner had witnessed a dark figure near the window of the Debates' residence. Prosecutors painted Richard as a ticking time bomb, a man who had trapped himself in a web of deceit and desperation. The jury braced themselves to delve into the chilling details of the case, anticipated to hear the remainder of a 4-hour recording. Live from Rockville, Channel 3, Eyewitness News reported that over 600 pieces of evidence had been submitted, painting a stark picture of the events leading up to the crime. Testimony had poured in from more than 130 witnesses, including Richard himself. His legal team asserted that law enforcement had succumbed to tunnel vision, fixating on Richard as the prime suspect from the outset. They contended that the police constructed their timeline to fit their initial hypothesis. Yet the truth was far more complex. Investigators had diligently pursued every lead Richard provided, including the contractor involved in the ongoing lawsuit. After extensive scrutiny, all other suspects were ruled out. This thorough investigation, combined with the technological evidence, the crime scene's peculiarities, the K-9 unit's findings, and the discrepancies in Richard's multiple narratives, only deepened the mystery. Richard's extramarital affair cast a long shadow, implicating him as the sole suspect. His defense team shifted focus to an unknown DNA sample found in the home, including traces on the weapon used to kill Connie. They suggested that a house cleaner had seen a dark figure near the window of the Debate house. Prosecutors painted Richard as a ticking time bomb, a man driven into a corner by his own actions and choices. As the trial progressed, it became evident that Richard Debates' motive for killing Connie stemmed from his fear of a divorce tarnishing his reputation. He dreaded losing their mutual friends and was overwhelmed by the financial consequences that such a separation would entail. The looming custody battle for their 2 young sons, RJ and Connor, added to his growing anxiety. 4 weeks into the trial, Connie's sister took the stand, recounting a harrowing family meeting held just a day after Connie's tragic death. It was during this gathering at their parents' home that they learned of the shooting, with Richard Debates present. She recalled how upon his arrival, he uttered the chilling words, "I didn't do it. There was someone in the house," he insisted, adding, "I need a lawyer." His demeanor raised alarm. He seemed distraught and physically ill, appearing as though he had been crying. As the family gathered around the kitchen table, she testified that Richard shared his version of events, claiming he had already retained legal counsel. Under the scrutiny of the jury, she painted a picture of Richard's arrival, his need for assistance to enter the house, his visibly shaken state, and the signs of his emotional turmoil. It was a moment heavy with tension as the details of that fateful day began to unfold. In court, Richard appeared visibly shaken, tears evident on his face as family gathered around the kitchen table. He recounted to the jurors the harrowing story of that day, asserting he had sought legal counsel in the wake of the tragedy. Despite being advised by his lawyer to remain silent, Richard Debates felt compelled to share his side of the story. Connie's sister and her brother-in-law, who also took the stand, observed that Richard displayed an unsettling lack of emotion as he recounted the events. Connie's sister recounted how Richard mentioned a family trip planned for after the holidays to Great Wolf Lodge, highlighting his intent to find someone to accompany the family of 7, reflecting the normalcy that once reigned before tragedy struck. Residents of the Ellington neighborhood, where the crime unfolded, testified that nothing appeared amiss on that fateful day. A judge remarked in court that they hoped to conclude the state's case by mid-next week, with no court scheduled for the following day, and proceedings set to resume on Friday. By the end of the week, or more accurately, by the middle of next week, the courtroom drama was poised to continue. Richard had testified that yes, Richard admitted to being in love with both women, expressing feelings of entrapment. While he acknowledged the affair, he vehemently denied that it made him a killer, expressing how he missed Connie daily and would never harm his children. Sarah, Richard's mistress, took the stand, revealing her reluctance to cause the disruption of the Debates family. She expressed her contentment in raising her daughter alone, even opting not to include Richard's name on the birth certificate. Tearfully, she conveyed that she had never pressured Richard to leave Connie, though she felt a deep sense of shame and embarrassment over the events that had transpired. Sarah clarified that there had never been any discussions about harming or killing Connie, asserting that Richard had never admitted to committing the act, even after 5 weeks of intense testimony. Both sides concluded their cases, leading to a pivotal moment in May 2022. A jury deliberated for a mere 3 hours before delivering a shocking verdict in the Richard Debates murder trial, finding him guilty on all counts. The atmosphere in the courthouse was thick with tension as the verdict was reached. The families of Richard and Connie were engulfed in a whirlwind of emotions as the verdict echoed through the courtroom. For Connie, this was a sentence that felt like death itself, while Richard, the convicted murderer, had been living a life of freedom on parole for the past 6.5 years. Although the Margada family would never find closure, justice had finally been served for Connie. She was a beloved sister, mother, and daughter, and her absence was deeply felt by all who loved her. I recall the day Connie was born. I am 10 years her senior. My father took me to the hospital to meet her, and I will never forget that moment when the nurse held her up to the window. It was a memory forever etched in my heart. Richard's defense team expressed their resolve to continue fighting for their client. With the trial spanning 5 weeks, they were taken aback by the jury's swift decision, voicing their disappointment at the outcome. The effort put into this exhaustive case was immense, yet they pledged to pursue further legal avenues. As the news cycle shifted, the focus turned to breaking developments. In a dramatic turn of events, Richard Debates was sentenced to 65 years in prison. The judge condemned his actions as brutal, calculated, and incomprehensible, marking a significant moment in this tragic narrative. With a maximum release date set for May 2087, Richard, before being taken away, proclaimed his innocence, insisting he would never cease fighting for justice for his wife, Connie, whom he claimed to think about every single day. Richard's parents remained steadfast in their belief in his innocence, grappling with the unfathomable idea that just 2 days before Christmas, he could have lured Connie downstairs to her death, subsequently staging the scene and continuing life as if nothing had changed. In October 2024, Richard appealed his conviction. Trent Lillema, his defense attorney, stood before 6 justices in a room filled with Yukon law students, alleging that state prosecutor Matthew Gdansky had engaged in a pattern of misconduct that denied Richard a fair trial. Perhaps the most damaging piece of evidence arose from a question that loomed ominously just 24 hours after the trial court excluded certain notes. The prosecution pressed, asking, "Did you feel like a ticking time bomb?" The term, ticking time bomb, painted Richard Debates as a perilous individual. His defense attorney argued that using the defendant's own prior inconsistent statements to undermine his testimony was entirely appropriate. Yet one must wonder, should this not be a fair trial, rather than a mere display of gamesmanship? As this episode was recorded, the matter remained in the hands of the Connecticut Supreme Court. The description of Richard as a dangerous person was troubling. The defense maintained that it was not improper to utilize the defendant's own words against him to challenge his credibility once he took the stand. Isn't a fair trial the goal, rather than a simple contest of wits? However, as the recording progressed, it was clear this case was still in limbo. In many cases, a disturbing pattern emerges where individuals perceive murder as the only escape from their circumstances. This mindset is one that seems rational to them, despite its chilling implications. The pain inflicted when someone is taken from their loved ones is profound, yet the aftermath and its severity often fail to resonate with those who choose this path. Connie's sister Leslie now shoulders the responsibility of raising Connie's 2 sons. These boys, haunted by their father's deceit, live in constant fear that a stranger might invade their home. They are only just beginning to grapple with the horrific reality of what Richard has done. Connie's mother frequently reflects on the last phone call she had with her daughter. The moment remains vivid in her memory, as Connie answered with a heartfelt, "Mom, I love you. You're my best friend." Those words encapsulated who Connie was, a kind and nurturing soul who endeavored to make everyone feel valued and cherished. Her best friend Kim expressed her grief, stating, "I miss her laughter. I miss the way she made me feel. I miss how much fun she was and how much life she brought to me and to others around her. I miss every single thing about her." For those who prefer to listen on the go, our episodes are now available in podcast form. You can find this through the link in our description box or by searching for Truly Criminal Podcast on your preferred podcasting platforms.